This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
Are you sure?
I'm not sure of anything anymore.
Okay.
I know. I don't know what's going on with the global economy, my identity. I don't, what is what.
Yeah. This system has just begun to crash, so support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get monthly bonus episodes. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Brian, you said you're not sure who you are or where you are, what is happening. How are you doing generally? It sounds not great.
Look, I'm doing as well as the next guy trying to wade his way through Trump's America. My gold panning pan in hand, my pickaxe setting out to the hills to try to find some precious metals that'll be the only things left valuable in the post-apocalyptic.
But Brian, I heard that America is entering its new golden age. That was what I thought.
Oh, you heard about Liberation Day. Yeah. I'm glad that the news of Liberation Day has spread. No, they actually canceled Liberation Day. We've been, I guess, unliberated by the new tariff regime because as of 20 minutes ago when we're recording this, the tariffs are off again, except for China where they're super on. They are now like 125% on. By the time you listen to this, dear System Crash listener, I'm sure that will be completely irrelevant. The tariffs will be back on. China's will be like 800% now. Can't keep track of any of this stuff.
I have to admit, I'm in New Zealand. It's early in the morning here. I did not see that the tariffs were delayed until you just said that. I had to look it up to be like, is he for real? And he is for real. Yeah.
I am for real. Yeah, after announcing the tariffs on what even was it?
80
last
countries.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I don't know. Time is a flat circle now. It's completely meaningless. And yeah, just like days and days of crashing. They're just like, he's just like, yeah, never mind. The funniest thing, well, there's some, and we'll get into all of this stuff, I'm sure. What the funniest, there's been some speculation online that like the 90-day pause, this was just something that one of those like meme accounts on X just sort of like completely made up. It was like the Walter Bloomberg anonymous meme account, just like was like, report Trump team plans like 2 days ago. So
yeah.
And there was no reporting. It was just like some shit some guy was saying.
I read about this, and then like the share prices all started to recover because this random account on X said it was paused, and then the administration came out and was like, no, it's not paused, and then the share prices all crashed back down again.
And then also people are saying like, well, like maybe they like saw that and they were like, oh, like we have an out, and it's like already been out there, and so like some of course it's perfect that some meme account has led the recovery here. But Jesus.
It does feel like that's the only thing that changes it though, is like the share prices, right? When the stock market is doing bad enough, they might finally respond to something, but otherwise, like that's the only thing that can make them
that's
pull
what's
back.
Been remarkable is that like Trump didn't really seem to give a shit. Like he didn't like he said in the past that any president that sees the Dow tank 1,000 points in a day should be removed from office or something. He's got some famous tweet like that. And of course, it's just like way past that, just like tanking down. And I mean, surely he's aware of it, even as he's golfing in Mar-a-Lago or whatever. But yeah, it's it's truly good times over here. Fortunately, I am a longtime journalist and media employee, so I don't have a 401k to speak of. So there's nothing to tank there. I have like I have some like
you're not affected
bills.
by this. Yeah, you're just affected by all the prices going up as a result of this.
That's right. It's early in the morning for you where you're still in New Zealand. I can never keep track.
Yeah. I think by the time this goes out, I will not be in New Zealand, but as we talk.
See, we can't keep track of the global economy. We can't keep track of Paris.
Yeah.
It's just wild times here. So what have you been up to in New Zealand?
I've been working a lot, actually, which is not the way I love to spend these trips. It's been a good time. I'm going to go down the Hobbiton again, of course, because I need to see, my little Hobbit environment.
That's where they shot the Hobbit city in Lord of the Rings, but
exactly.
They actually built it.
Yeah, so when they filmed the Lord of the Rings, they like set it up and then they tore it down because they were like, well, it's a set, nobody's going to want to come back to a set. And then, of course, the movies like took off. And so then when they were filming The Hobbit like 10 years later or whatever, they were like, okay, we're going to rebuild it, but this time it's going to be like permanent and we can turn it into like an attraction, right? It was on this guy's farm. Like this was the area that they found that they really liked. And so the guy was like, okay, if you want to set it up again on our farm, you can do it, but you got to like build it for real.
Just leave it there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you stay there?
No. Obviously, you can stay nearby, but no, you can't stay on the set itself. Like last year, they added Hobbit holes that you can actually go inside because, like obviously a set, it's just facades. There's nothing behind. So they finally built like actual Hobbit holes that you can go in and, they're all kind of done up and stuff.
It brings me a lot of joy to learn that you follow this story. Like you're aware of the goings on and the most recent updates to Hobbit.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The one other thing I would say about New Zealand is one of the things I wanted to do while I was down here, because obviously in North America, we don't have the Chinese car brands. So before I came down, I hit up an Australian automotive journalist who I know. I was like, what's the deal with the brands? Like, can I potentially drive some of these in New Zealand? So she kind of hooked me up. So I drove a BYD Atto 3, which is like an EV SUV. And I also drove a Great Wall Motors Compass Alpha Hybrid, which is kind of like a ute or like a small pickup truck sort of a thing for North Americans. That one is gas powered, but I was surprised at like how fuel efficient it seemed to be. I don't know. I'm not a big car expert or anything, but like, I don't know, the idea that these Chinese cars are like, I don't know, a step down from what we're getting from American brands or European brands or like Japanese or Korean. Like, I don't know, man. You can't justify it. Like, they're very good quality vehicles. Yeah.
How long did you get to ride it around? You have it all day?
Yeah. So the Great Wall Motors one, I drove that for, I guess, a few hundred kilometers because I left Auckland and went out to visit some glowworm caves. People who've been down here,
you took the EV to go see the glowworms.
Yeah, exactly. No, this one was the gas one, but the EV I was just kind of driving around in Auckland City in that one. I found with the BYD, I wanted to go into a dealership and I just didn't make it into one after to see some of the other models. But like the interior styling, like my only complaint would be that the interior styling was like so weird.
You sent me a picture of it. Was that the one you sent me?
Exactly. Yeah, there were some very unique design decisions there.
The interior looks like what I said was like, it looks like a boombox from like from 20 years ago. Those big like sporty boombox that add just like completely unnecessarily like curves and just like bubbles and circles on there. I don't know. I mean, at least it's like trying something.
It's trying to be unique, certainly, but I don't know. For me, I'm a very kind of like minimal, sleek kind of person, so it wasn't working for me. But I spoke to someone else down here who was like, have you been inside that BYD? It's so funky inside. I love it. I was like, okay, so this is working for some people, just not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate, because I feel like that's like the minimal, sleek, like almost like nasty, like is the Tesla lane, right?
Yeah.
And now maybe like people have been long before the backlash to Tesla. I mean, BYD has been like a competitor in, non-American markets so it's like they probably trying to differentiate. Let's give this thing some personality. Let's do it a little differently. That's interesting.
It's cool. I'll have more to say because I wanted to drive them because obviously the discussion of whether these vehicles should be tariffed in the North American market and what the future of that is going to look like, I think is going to become even more of a conversation in the next like year, if not much less than that. So I wanted to actually have driven some to, at least know what they're like, right? To have some degree of like informed commentary when those discussions come up, because I plan to write about it in the Canadian context as well, given everything going on there.
Let's drive those Chinese EVs onto Canadian highways, huh?
Totally.
Well, the new impediment to that ever happening is, I think, probably going to take up, I guess there's long been impediments to that happening, but now
I guess the impediments for it happening in the United States, maybe not so much in Canada,
Yeah, maybe Canada will get them after this. I don't know. Canada hates Elon Musk with a newfound passion.
Totally. One of the most recent stories is Starlink might not get access to subsidies for like northern internet rollout in like remote regions and stuff because Canada. Of course they're already going to be excluded from any future electric vehicle rebate program.
Good. Canada taking that hard line. But yeah, the tariffs have been quite the sort of all-encompassing vortex of insanity for just about all of us. I'm sure most of our listeners here, wherever you are, they have been unavoidable, unignorable, and
well, it was such a sight, like Donald Trump kind of getting up there, bringing out his big board
his
with
big,
the
poster
tariffs on
board.
it. Yeah, exactly. And I thought it was hilarious. He was like, we were going to have a bigger board, but it's windy today and we didn't want it to fly away. Like, obviously he said it in like his more Trumpian way that is like funnier. Then they started to dig into like, what is going on with these tariffs? How are these being calculated? And it's not like the tariffs that are being applied to the United States. It's just like, does the United States have a trade deficit with this country? Okay, then we're going to tariff them based on the trade deficit. And it's like, this is not how this works.
Yeah. It was just like so boneheaded and like just, I mean, astounding. I mean, it's just, first of all, like the capacity for this man and this administration to like find new ways to just shock the public at large at just how stupid and reckless he really is it's just, you can never underestimate it. You cannot this is a new one. Like, this is a brand new one. A lot of, so far, the policies and horrible things coming out of this administration were just like, fitting the mold of the last one, maybe more concerted, maybe more aggressive, maybe like more of that Project 2025 sheen on it. Musk was in the mix now, but like this, he didn't do this he didn't like drop totally insane, totally undeserved, totally inexplicable tariffs on every nation in the world. He was at it for 4 years last time. So again, like I get it. I get that folks are caught flat-footed. At the same time, this is just kind of the shit that he does. This fits the mold of his general psychology. There's a pretty decent like op-ed from Jamel Bouie in the New York Times basically arguing that like you can't like go line by line and look at the strategy or go line by line. People were arguing last week too. David Dan in the American Prospect also has a piece where it's just like, it's just sort of like gangster capitalism, right? Where it's just all about wielding power. And as Bowie points out, like, it's not even clear Trump like fully actually understands truly what a tariff is. He's heard the word a lot. He's heard it for decades. He knows it's this thing that he has an opinion about, and he thinks it's just a fee that countries have to pay the United States or something, and that, we're not paying as much, so it's unfair. And it just like triggers this weird thing in his like lizard businessman brain.
It's totally wild, right? Because he still talks about it as though like a tariff against Canada is going to be paid by Canadians, not by the Americans who are buying and importing Canadian products.
Right. Right. That's not how it works. We're not just like, we're not injured by this. Americans are buying products that they then use that have value and that they then sell in their businesses or whatever. But like that part doesn't compute to him.
I saw all these posts from like small business people on Reddit yesterday, I guess it was, where they're like discussing the tariffs, and they're like, I was importing these products like $3,000 worth or something, and DHL or whatnot said I need to pay $2,000 in import levies and all this kind of stuff because of the new tariffs that are brought in. And they were like, I can't afford this. Like, this makes my business completely uneconomical.
Absolutely insane. And like we said, from the ground up.
The one other thing I wanted to say there, though, is just about the point about gangster capitalism, right? Because basically it felt like what we were seeing after he returned to power was basically all of these billionaires and these companies like pledging money to the Trump administration. And it felt very much like, if you are not going to kind of pay your fee, you are not going to get good access to the Trump administration. He's not going to take your business's considerations into mind when making policy, as if he's done that anyway. But it kind of felt like you needed to pay your like $1 million to the inauguration or whatever, or you're on the outs and you're not going to have access to the inner circle, or you need to go like buy your expensive dinner at Mar-a-Lago to prove that you're, in the in circle, right?
But then he just fucks you over anyways.
Yeah, totally. And now it's like bringing that to the international level. You need to make a special deal with us or bring down your tariffs or whatever, or else we're just going to like totally penalize your economy and try to fuck you over, even if that also means our economy is going to suffer too, because we don't accept that that is an actual result of this, because it's just bringing manufacturing home and blah blah blah. Like, yeah.
And that's what he started calling. He's like, we're making the tailor-made deals, the tailor-made deals. He's calling them like the countries that were coming before he announced this pause, to sort of like, you have to cut a deal with the king. Yeah, it's just kind of like Mad King shit, or like or some like real estate empire sort of operators version of a king.
He's gonna sit up on his throne, and every like ambassador needs to come in and like kneel and provide their offering to the king to show that they are kind of recognizing his authority, basically.
And that's how he planned on dealing with all of this, because like again, in his mind, it's just like a trade deficit, or the fact that, you know, a country's, you know, importing X number of goods and we're not importing them, is like that country is taking advantage of us somehow, in his, again, ever increasingly addled brain, means that we're being like taken advantage of, or like, because he just does not compute the very basics of global trade. So we get this situation where it's like totally haphazard. I mean, totally wild, totally just like unprecedented. And then the stock's tanking. He says he's doing it on purpose so he could like curry more favor, so people will be more obligated to come and cut deals. And then they obviously realize, after we're getting to a certain point where it looks like, you know, we might be facing something more shaped like an actual sort of capital revolt, then that's when, you know, you actually see him sort of pulling back, because it was clear that, you know, he was losing not just Democrats and sort of importers and exporters, but just like people whose 401ks were taking a hit, and the retirees who were losing their savings, who like voted for him. Like, that it just became a thing, as it always does. Like, I voted for you, Trump, but this is looking pretty bad. And people screenshot a billion of those on X and everything. From the beginning, you could tell how stupid this was, because I think there was, and remains, let's be honest, a pretty plausible case to be made that the policy itself was AI generated, or was at least applied, or was put into a chatbot and then had it spit out the results on how it was going to affect different countries.
Trade war by ChatGPT. You love
by
it. Yeah.
ChatGPT. I mean, yeah. So like, of course, most people are familiar now with the saga, but briefly to recap, like James Surowiecki, the finance journalist, when he figured out like where these rates were coming from, because people were squinting at that poster board that you were mentioning and going like, what, okay, wait, what's the trade rate going to be on Vietnam? Like, what is that? Okay, what is that? Okay,
it's hilarious, right? Because I heard people commenting, I believe it would be in Canada, and they were kind of like, so you had all these like countries around the world squinting to try to see what was on this board that Trump was holding up to see what tariff was going to be applied to their country.
What the trade policy was for that was going to completely upend their entire nation. That is just, in a nutshell, just like really encapsulates like our political moment, I think. And he figured out that formula that we're talking about, how it was just like that simple division, taking into account deficits versus amount of goods being imported. That was it. People on the internet pretty quickly figured out that that was the exact formula that if you asked ChatGPT, how could you easily impose tariffs, assuming a 10% base rate? This is the answer that like all the chatbots would return. Not only that is this like the same policy that at the very least a chatbot would recommend, but people were like looking at the order. Like at first it was like, why are they listed in this order? And someone figured out that it looked like it was like organized by like domain name. So if you had put it and it had spit them out again in a very like common like computer literate way, would be to organize them accordingly. So it turns out that Trump's top trade advisor, Pete Navarro, he's been like basically like this is like a policy that he's liked forever. So it's still unclear whether or not it was just like famously like a true Trump lackey. He went to jail for 4 months because he refused to testify against Trump for the J6 insurgency. So he's like true Trump's inner circle, and he has liked this formula before, but it's also the chatbot formula. So it seems to me that maybe what probably happened is took this thing, they just kind of like did actually shove it into ChatGPT and say like calculate accordingly, didn't bother to really look at the results because you had these insanely high tariffs on places, again, that like import a lot of stuff to America like that we need, and so that there's a bigger deficit, like Vietnam, where like a lot of sort of production has moved because businesses can get cheaper labor there, even cheaper than China, and a lot of times, and it has a larger industrial base. They're sending us a lot more stuff than we're sending to Vietnam, and then so like you
and the other example is say somewhere like Bangladesh, right, where they're making a lot of textiles, a lot of clothing, and sending that over here, but obviously it's a relatively impoverished country, and so they're not buying a lot of goods from the United States, right? And so you kind of understand why there's a trade deficit, but if you're just looking at abstract numbers, that's not going to be clear.
That's how you can get like AI generated trade policy or the equivalent of it blasted out. The other, of course, indicators are that like completely uninhabited islands are subject to these tariffs. And that seems like something that might happen if you were applying like an automated policy, blanket sort of all known territories, and they just got cut up in this. So
you're downplaying the threats of penguin trade, Brian.
That's true. Yeah, we could sell some snow cones. Yeah. It's truly just insane. So we don't know. We still don't know. But like I made the point in my newsletter over the week. Like if we had AI generated trade policy, this is what it would look like, and this is how it would work. It would be some moron in the Trump administration going like, okay, well the boss wants his numbers crunched, and he doesn't really give a shit how it turns out. He just wants something fast. So I'm just going to use this thing that everybody has been saying is about to birth the next artificial god. It's AGI's on the doorstep, so it must be good enough to crunch some tariff numbers, right?
I wonder if Doge sent over one of its brilliant young engineers
completely not out of the Trump hadn't decided, per the Washington Post's reporting, Trump had not decided which tariff rate to apply until 3 hours before he announced them. And like all of his trade advisors, like they had all these other plans that apparently allegedly were more developed and were like with targeted rates that took into account actual reciprocal tariff rates, like because other countries do have tariff rates on it. It's like it is a thing, but it's just not just based on imports and deficits. So he apparently like overruled all that and just went to the dumb one, and then just blew up the world's economy on a hunch, because that's where we are. Interestingly, we've talked a lot about on this show about how the tensions between like Elon Musk and Trump have been overblown in the past, or the hope that at least like that these two egomaniacs would finally will just like immediately clash and get furious at each other and rupture the relationship. But obviously that hasn't happened yet. But this is like the second or third, I think, visible signs of the relationship. I wouldn't say it's like blowing up. Trump is still taking Musk with him to Mar-a-Lago and stuff like that. But Musk is like furious. This is tanking his company's stock prices. So, of course, that's like the red line for Musk. And he's been letting Navarro have it on Twitter, calling him dumber than a bag of dirt or something like that on X.
Ooh, the big insults are coming out now.
Ooh, yeah.
It is interesting, though, right? Because obviously you had this moment where Musk was basically trying to buy this Wisconsin Supreme Court election or whatever, and really failed to do so, I think, because of all of the anger that is being drummed up against the Trump administration and Musk personally, right?
Important to note there also, just real quick, that it's not just like I feel like he lost it despite being involved. Like a lot of the polling suggests that he lost it because Musk was involved.
Exactly. And so like you have that moment, right, where it seems after that there were some stories that were like, is Musk going back to his companies, gonna end his term at Doge? And then they both came out and were like, no, that that's not happening, those stories aren't true, whatever. But this is like another kind of potential complication in that relationship. Personally, for me, I don't think it's enough to cause it to implode. Like I don't see that happening yet. Maybe I'll be wrong, but you can certainly see that there are more issues starting to come up as the pushback to what the Trump administration and what Doge are doing is growing, and also as they continue to feel, and especially as Musk's businesses kind of feel the heat of his relationship with the Trump administration.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be an implosion. I think it'll be sort of maybe a managed exit. We got that report from Politico like a week or two ago indicating that like they were sort of trying to start to shepherd Musk towards the exits. I mean, especially people in Trump's administration recognize recognize the liability that he's become, in addition to sort of actually, serving a lot of, it's a very complex relationships, even for a right-wing propagandist state. Musk has now overstepped in a lot of ways. People hate Musk too, not just Trump. Like, there's negative approval ratings for Musk. A big reason that he lost that Wisconsin race was just because voters specifically did not want Musk's influence to win the day. And that was like a reason that a lot of voters sort of cited in voting for the Democratic Supreme Court candidate.
It does kind of sound like they would potentially be making Musk out as like the fall guy for the broader anger at the administration there, then, if that's how it plays out.
No, it absolutely is. And that's how they've been using him the whole time, right? Or at least aware of, like, I think it was another Politico piece about Musk and Russ Vought's relationship. Vaught is the architect of Project 2025, or one of them, and he's at the OMB, the budget office in DC. So it's a very powerful position. And he is at least aware of how useful Musk has been in just kind of charging ahead and gutting these federal institutions and firing people in a way that, like, the political blowback would have been much more severe if it was trained on Trump. And instead, it's under this guise of technocratic reform, and this entrepreneur Superman is coming in and doing it, not Trump. So it gave, honestly, a huge sheen of legitimacy. We've talked about this before on System Crash, like this whole AI first strategy logic, like, oh, it's Future Man. He's coming in to streamline the government with his technology.
And it's still serving like the purposes and the goals of this like broader right-wing project.
And specifically, I think, Vaught in a lot of times was just like shepherding Musk as to like where to go and getting some of his wish list done. You talk about ghouls, like, this guy is a real ghoul. His daughter has cystic fibrosis, and the treatment that was developed for it was done so with funding for sort of like the National Endowment of Health that, goes to cancer researchers, goes to disease researchers. And he has personally been instrumental in stripping that away, basically saying, like, this cure is not going to be available to anybody else, or future cures. Or Musk is one kind of a ghoul, like, this guy is the other. This guy is the guy sort of like deliberately working to sort of hollow out the government, to like really sort of quietly and deliberately like sort of remake the state in this sort of deeply conservative, loyalist to this conservative theocratic cause. Then Musk is just, sort of out there on a whim, just spouting bullshit and sort of much more reactionary. And
it's an alliance of all these different types of ghouls, but like, Musk, obviously he gets the legitimacy to him that comes with this, the sense that he is enacting this whole-scale transformation, but also the ability to remake parts of the government to serve his companies if this is able to hold, right? Rolling out Starlink through so many different government agencies to make them dependent on this infrastructure, increasing the subsidies that he's getting for SpaceX. I'm sure that there are more examples of that, right?
Yeah.
We have obviously seen him, and of course he's trying to remake NASA so that NASA is going to be much more kind of dominated by SpaceX and the private space industry. Yeah. They're trying to, of course, remake the Pentagon budget, which now apparently is going to be $1 trillion, to make sure a lot more of that money is flowing to these like tech company defense companies, which obviously include SpaceX, but Palantir, Anduril, and these kind of up-and-comers as well.
And I think all that will hold. Again, I think it just remains to be seen how much Musk can discipline himself at all. And I mean, I think what's being floated is that, what is it, like the 100 days or 120 days that you get as a special advisor to the government in the role that he's currently in. And they're saying that when that expires, that will be sort of an obvious point to sort of unload Musk. If things don't, go drastically wrong in the interim for any of those parties, then that'll be what's happened. And he'll continue to have like a persistent and loud voice inside the White House's policymaking and, at the table in general, but he just won't sort of be the face of it, which again, Musk is so impulsive. He could blow even that up. I could see things going any number of ways, but I think that's certainly the trajectory I think things are on now. And in some ways, that could be even more insidious, right? Like, because as you said, the contracts will keep coming. His power won't be seriously diminished, and he'll be able to extract some of the gains that he wants without sort of making this sort of lightning rod presence known. And I think a lot of the pressure that's getting to him is coming from the Tesla takedown stuff, coming from sort of like that very vocal opposition to his properties and his companies. And then now we finally also see even some of his biggest investors are downgrading Tesla Tesla. They're saying like this is like hurt his brand. And so if Elon Musk understands anything, it's like stock price of Tesla, his car company. So in order to safeguard that, I wouldn't be surprised if this is part of kind of a managed exit.
Yeah, there's the Tesla piece, and then there's also what it does for future SpaceX business, right? Because one of the things it's done there is really, it's not going to be a short term, like in a couple of months changeover, but I think it has put a lot more fuel in the fire of these other potential alternatives based in Europe and places like that to make sure that they are actually offering a service that is to some degree comparable, so that in the next year to 2 years is a realistic alternative, so that people don't need to be reliant on SpaceX and whatnot, right? But obviously that's not something that can happen overnight, which is why Ukraine is still largely dependent on Starlink despite everything that's been going on.
Yeah.
There's one other like topic on this that maybe we should talk about before we go to like our final stories, to kind of wrap up the episode. And that's like this broader relationship of tech to the Trump administration, which I think this conversation we've been having touches on, right? Because we have actually seen this kind of public disagreement from Elon Musk. Some other tech folks like, say, Bill Ackman, for example, have been speaking out against Trump's policies. But I also feel like in the early days of the Trump administration, we had this real rallying around Trump by so many of the tech elites, because they wanted to kind of kiss the ring and show their fealty and make sure that they were going to try to benefit from what was coming of the Trump administration, what this new government was going to be. But it does feel like, and again, we're only a few months into this, but it does feel like the further and further we get into this administration, the more it looks like this kind of bet that they made on Trump is potentially not paying off in the way that they hope. They will probably get their big tax cut at some point in the next few months or whenever that's going to be. But how much does that alliance with Trump actually damage their broader businesses such that the tax cut doesn't really matter? And I feel like one of the things that we were talking about early on in this was they really backed Trump to make sure that there were going to be no big new taxes, there were going to be no regulations and antitrust investigations, and that they were going to be able to stop regulations internationally. And it feels like, other than on the tax front, that a lot of those things might not play out as they were planning, where we are seeing certain countries around the world seemingly being more ready to regulate American tech companies, continuing investigations against them. There's been some degree of tempering in the European Union, but it does seem like they're still committed to the path that they are on in terms of regulation, while also investing in developing alternatives. But then the other piece of that is domestically, it increasingly looks like these antitrust investigations are going to move forward. And like we see with the Trump administration and what they do, they will be targeting more of these tech companies that don't appear as aligned with the Trump administration, or kind of using the leverage of the government to make sure that the policies that these companies are pursuing are aligned with political objectives of the Trump administration. So I wonder what you make of that, like how we're seeing all of that play out right now.
Yeah, I think, once again, it comes down to power. It's less a market dynamic than it is sort of a power dynamic. It's just sort of hierarchical, where like Trump is at the top, you can sort of jockey for power and for favor, and how successfully you can do that while kissing the ring, while aligning with the handful of things that he actually seems to care about, I think will determine your success and the outcome. I mean, it's so fluid, and it does harken back to that sort of model of gangster capitalism that we were talking about earlier, with complicating factors, right? I feel like China, another interesting thing that has changed, as you said, other countries are more willing to regulate. China this time is ready to play hardball, where in the past, right, maybe it would have come to the negotiating table. This time it has just retaliated. So we have 100 and whatever 25% tariffs on imported Chinese goods, and they've slapped an 85% tariff on American ones. So this is going to be really crazy for a lot of the tech companies, especially Apple, right? The base of Apple's manufacturing is still in China, and how it negotiates this is going to be really interesting, because you talk about a tech company that, I mean, Tim Cook did still come and kiss the ring, but he did it a little bit less extravagantly than some of the other tech CEOs. But also China has sort of really, gotten under Trump's skin by refusing to come to the table, by refusing to roll over. Like right now, as we're recording this, the markets have like heaved a sigh of relief. They shot back up. The story now is that things are relatively okay, but this is insane. We still have an insane trade war going on between the two largest economies in the world. If this was any other administration, we'd still be in like red alert crisis zone, and we are. And I do think that that's going to reconfigure the tech landscape in a lot of ways. It really just speaks to how base like this whole conception of of just sort of the global economy, or just how things work, to have this whole thing emanating out of Trump's skull. And I feel like so far the best like artifact to encapsulate this, aside from the Trump announcing this stuff in the first place, is Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. This clip that's gone viral here, we can play it right here, where he's talking about, oh yeah, like manufacturing's going to move to America. We're going to have millions and millions of human beings turning those little screws, making iPhones.
Millions of people. Well, remember, the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones. That kind of thing is going to come to America. It's going to be automated, and great Americans, the trade craft of America, is going to fix them, is going to work on them.
First of all, like it's just been shown time and again, we do not currently have anything near sort of the industrial base to facilitate the building of a factory or a workforce that would do that in this time frame anyways. Foxconn, famously, the company that supplies labor to Apple to manufacture Apple products. Last Trump term, they came to Wisconsin got a huge tax break to build a factory, a big plant. Never happened. Great reporting in The Verge about this big sham of a project where they got, billions of dollars in subsidies to shook Trump's hand in his good graces, and literally worse than nothing ever came from it. Anyway, so that's the reality on the ground, is like one empty Foxconn warehouse building in Wisconsin. But the second part of it is just like the vision. This is totally reflective of what the Trump administration is thinking about when they think about labor and they think about American workers. They think about a horde of faceless, precariously employed laborers turning screws in, making iPhones the way that they do in China. They're underpaid. They're under duress. Their factories a lot of times have nets hung outside the building walls to catch the bodies of the workers who have had enough and can't take it anymore, and they throw themselves off it. And instead of fixing anything, they hang up the nets. I have personally been to those factories. I went to Shenzhen just before the first Trump administration, and I snuck into a factory. We can talk about that story in another time. And I saw sort of the scale and immense capacity that China had built out to house these workers who were just being funneled into tiny little dorm rooms and then spit out into rust-coated factory floors. It just looked miserable. It is nothing that we would want. I interviewed the workers there with a translator. They just talk about the horrible pressure, how if you mess up, your boss has you stand up in front of everybody and just chews you out. You're working overtime and not getting paid for it. They're saying we want that. Like, that's the knee-jerk. They haven't thought it through, obviously. There's no Project 2025 for bringing Chinese-style labor regimes to America. It's just what they think they want. It's workers that serve the oligarch, serve the king, serve the Trump-like figure. And that's what really disgusted me about seeing that sort of just so, like, flippantly broadcast as the aims. But that's the heart of it. And that is still being animated by, even this canceled policy, even this trade war with China. These are the desires. It's for power. People's lives don't really much matter. It's only to serve sort of the movers and shakers who should be able to enact such sweeping changes at will.
Very well said, right? And there was another moment that I saw in the past week where Trump was basically in front of a bunch of coal workers, and he was like, these guys want to be coal workers. They want to be going down in the coal mines. It's like, man, no, like these guys just want jobs in their communities. Like they don't want to be coal miners necessarily.
I saw that press, just a side note to that. And then the very next day, he went and signed an executive order or that overturned the Biden era work that was being done to prevent them from getting black lung, specifically coal miners from getting black work. He just wants to overturn that.
It's disgusting.
It is.
Maybe one point I would add on the tariffs, and then we can get to the final stories, is I wonder how much this gets through to people, but you feel like the more and more that people hear about price rises, are going to see like the disruptions in the types of things that they can buy at the store, it's going to become very apparent what is happening here. And I feel like maybe one from the past week that really kind of hit with at least a lot of people would have been that Nintendo announced the Switch 2, the follow-up to its very successful video game console. And it was like one day it was like, it's going to cost, I think, $449 in the United States, which is already quite, pricey, and pre-orders are going to be on this day, so get ready. And then Trump announced the tariffs, and Nintendo has to be like, so the pre-orders are delayed, we don't know if this is going to actually be the price anymore, it might be a lot more expensive. And then like obviously people were furious, and then up in Canada they also delayed the pre-orders, not because we have tariffs, but because our pre-order date needs to align with the US pre-order date, and people up here were like losing their minds.
Yeah, I joked on Blue Sky that the revolution's gonna come from the gamers, or at least the parents of the gamer kids who now have to be told that their Switch is being delayed. Sorry, kids, man. You can't have your Switch. This
is what's really gonna break it. This is what gets
the
everyone.
Straw that breaks the camel's back. It's just the Switch 2. It is. How do you plan for anything? Again, it's kind of like the market's coming back. Or people are like, oh, it's okay now, but he's been just like still just unveiling tariff after random tariff and rescinding them here and threatening them there. Like, who can trust anything out of the United States economic policy? Who can, make any kind of strategic long-term planning this way? You can't. I mean, you might just like wake up and find that, the chatbot said that, oh, now you have a 42% tariff instead of a 10% tariff. And you just can't you can't plan economically. Businesses can't sort of plan for production. People can't plan for it's really like the worst of both worlds. It's madness. It's so stupid at the end of it. Like, it's so stupid. That's what I just, that just galls at the end. We've just, once again, put this man in power who is just so impulsive and so stupid. He can't even be bothered to figure out what a tariff actually is before he enacts a policy, perhaps with the help of some software automation that then is capable of swinging a wrecking ball across the entire world.
It's truly incredible to watch, and it sucks that so many people, Americans and people beyond, are being caught up in all of this. Let's get to a few final stories, I guess, to kind of end off our episode and kind of tie up what has been happening over the past week. I feel like we were both paying attention to some statements made by different people about AI replacing workers. Of course, for me, I saw Shopify CEO, who is of course Canadian, talking about their new AI first hiring policy. So basically, like, if there's a desire to do some new work or hire someone, the company needs to try to use AI to get the work done before it can look at basically hiring anyone new. There was some anecdotal stuff on Blue Sky about people who had talked to other companies, and they're basically doing the same thing, just not publicizing it in the way that Shopify is. Obviously you write a lot about labor and AI. Like, what did you make of this?
I think the interesting thing about the Shopify one is that he's like reversing the order. Usually it's like, oh, we're going to give our employees access to these AI tools and they'll be able, we're not going to replace anybody, even if that's exactly what the CTO wants to do, or the CFO usually is the one that wants. But it's going to augment output and productivity, and it's not going to replace anybody's jobs. But here he's like pretty nakedly saying, like, justify your job. Like, say you can't do it better than an AI. It's very like Elon Musk style. I know he has an affinity for Elon Musk. So
very much so. Yeah. And I was looking at his Twitter feed the other day to see like what he's been saying during the election. And he's not saying as much that's pro-conservative, but he's still sharing a lot of like anti-immigrant stuff and pro-AI stuff and all that. It's like, dude,
so you could see where it's going.
Individual. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sort of is a good segue back into the sordid halls of the United States, where Dr. Oz, the new administrator for the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, known as CMS, had his first sort of all-hands meeting, and he announced that they would be looking into prioritizing AI avatars over frontline healthcare providers. Per Wired, I quote, Oz claimed that if a patient went to a doctor for a diabetes diagnosis, it would be $100 per hour, while an appointment with an AI avatar would cost considerably less at just $2 an hour.
That is so grim.
And so his very first meeting, and again, we've seen this in Doge, we've seen this from Musk, we've seen this from Dr. Oz, the television personality who is in charge of Medicare and Medicaid services. Just another grim. And I think since we've hit on Lutnick and we've hit on Oz, I have to also include the delightful fact that the head of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the United States, States also earned himself a little news cycle this week by saying that the agency should try to be like Amazon Prime, but for human beings. And that is an actual quote. He says we need to be thinking about this more like a business, applying the logic of getting an Amazon package to your doorstep to finding and detaining and deporting a human being. Just the dehumanization is off the charts here, folks. It's enough to make you a little bit sick to your stomach there, huh?
What can you even say about it? It's so disgusting, right? You know, someone else who makes me sick to my stomach, of course, is Elon Musk. And he's back in the news for many reasons, but we need to make sure we call out this specific one, which is that he did another gaming live stream on Path of Exile 2, where apparently he didn't even speak very much. Like, he just kind of live streamed for an hour and a half and didn't even try to narrate what he was doing, but just
he was like in an airplane or something. It's just like his face.
Maybe he's probably on his plane. Yeah. But basically, apparently he kept dying because he was trying to prove what a good gamer he is, but he kept being killed even with tutorial bosses. But one of the big things from this is that as he was doing it, like, he was being absolutely bombarded with messages from people who hate him and who tell him how shitty he is. It has to be getting through to this guy.
Right. Well, people were trying to tell him how to turn off comments and he just like didn't respond. They're like, hey, you know, Elon, you can. Well, you do love to see it. You do love to see it.
He deserves so much worse, but at least he's getting that. At least he can't even enjoy trying to cosplay as a good gamer.
Try as he might, paying that like outsourcing somebody to play the game for him.
Yeah.
Like he even admitted to that, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe so.
Where's the shame? Where's the shame?
Oh man, that guy lost shame long ago.
He's like transcended it. I feel like he's aware of it. He just he absorbs it and it's part of him because he's like so like full of shame and it like animates like every part of his being, but he doesn't ever acknowledge it. He's not like Trump where Trump is like truly kind of impervious to it. Like, you know, somebody who just like doesn't really give a shit and it bounces off. Like Elon is just like, he just cannot be cool. He cannot be chill no matter what. And it just infects him in a way that's just, it's unavoidable.
And he's so desperate to be too. Yeah.
I do want to say real quick before we sign off, one tiny silver lining here, or remains to be seen. I actually haven't dug into this act yet, but there's a bill called the No Fakes Act that is aimed at defending the fundamental right to your voice and likeness from AI companies. And its aim is to protect everyone from non-consensual deepfakes. I know the Senator Chris Coons is behind this one, as well as some co-signers. It has gained a lot of supporters in the creative industry. So it's a sign at least that there is still some appetite to try to push back on this stuff. Again, haven't dug into it, don't have the details yet, but you like to see at least some shots over the bow in this vein, right?
We'll have to explore that one a little bit more. And I think the final one that we want to leave people with this week is some good news on Tesla, good news from our perspective, which is that apparently Tesla has about 2,400 Cybertrucks that it just can't seem to sell, which have like a kind of a book value of about $200 million. And because it cannot sell these vehicles, it apparently is also not accepting many Cybertrucks as trade-ins. So people who bought these vehicles trying to offload them and get some other kind of Tesla are not even being able to trade them back into the company itself. And some Cybertruck owners have been reportedly told by the company to lemon law their vehicles to get rid of it because they can't give it back to the company because nobody can get rid of these things. And the prices... Oh, totally. And the prices of used Teslas in the US and UK, according to new data, are just like plummeting far quicker than other EV prices. So what people are doing is working.
Yeah. And I guess you can just peel the panel off by hand, the side of your Cybertruck. If you have it, you can at least have the satisfaction of that, manually de-skinning your very bulletproof truck. Well, good. See, we end things on a good note here. There's hope yet.
Always got to be hopeful, right?
That's good.
System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode. Thanks for listening.
Bye.